The story of Community of Grace begins 15 years ago at Community Church of Joy. That was the church where I was a pastor for 22 years, and that church planted this church. And years earlier, when I was a young pastor at Community Church of Joy, my mom was in the hospital, and she was there for several days. And my dad was there every day, and one day he was sitting in the waiting room and became friends with another man about my dad's age, whose wife was also in the hospital. And over the course of a few days, they got to know each other. And eventually their conversation turned to church. And the man said to my dad, "I go to a Lutheran church just down the street." And my dad said, "Oh, really?" He said, "My son is the pastor of a Lutheran church. It's called Community Church of Joy." And the man said, "Yeah, I've heard about that church." And my dad said, "Well, what have you heard?" He said, "Well, they're not really Lutheran." And my dad said, "Well, I know that their way of doing ministry is quite contemporary, but theologically they're Lutheran." And the man said, "No, they're not Lutheran. They let anyone in." Now, I think that's the point of the church. And yet, to be a church that lets anyone in looks a lot better on paper than it does in reality. We made a decision when we started this church that DNA of Community Church of Joy would stay with us, that we would be a church for anyone and everyone. But that's not always easy to do. To be a church for anyone and everyone means that we have to be a church for anyone and everyone. And that means that we're going to rub shoulders sometimes with people with whom we disagree or people who see life differently. It means that there are going to be times when we have to step back and maybe reevaluate how we see the world because we've met a different perspective and maybe a different perspective. It's not always easy being a church for anyone and everyone, particularly in our world where we now define ourselves by who we're against and define ourselves in terms of who our enemies are. And in our country, we have sliced up the United States of America into smaller and smaller segments of people, and we just can't tolerate each other at all. And even the most tolerant of us can't tolerate intolerant people. It's really hard to be a church for anyone and everyone. In our day, right now, there are at least two denominations that look like they may split apart over that one question: who's in and who's out. It is not easy to be a church for anyone and everyone. And I can tell you from personal experience how hard it has been for me to be the pastor of a church for anyone and everyone. On those weekends when I see Seahawks fans walk in those ugly-looking jerseys, it takes every ounce of grace in me to say, yes, you can be here today. And then Patriots fans, I mean, holy cow, God, what are you asking of us? Is there any breathing room at all? So we've been called to be a church for anyone and everyone. You saw a little picture of that today when we said that children matter. They're not just the future of the church. The children are the church right now, and they belong with us in worship. And I thought today that rather than telling a story about what it looks like to be a church for anyone and everyone, that I would have a couple from our church tell the story of what this church has meant for them, being a church for anyone and everyone. And so I'm going to have Tina and Liz to come on up. Tina has just joined our church board, so I'm really excited for you to get a chance to meet her and to meet Liz. And let's welcome them to the stage this morning. Thank you. I think we'll move you over just a little bit so our camera guys don't get all freaked out being over there. Now, first of all, before we sort of hear your story, tell us a bit about the two of you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Tina Nunziato. This is Liz Cruz. Liz and I have been together for about 15 years, and we're actually, when we had our commitment ceremony 15 years ago, it wasn't legal. So
Right.
We actually leave for Maui tomorrow, so that on our actual anniversary on Thursday, we're going to officially get married.
Wow, how cool.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very cool.
So,
On Kaanapali Beach, are you going to be there? Or are you
Yeah,
going-
pretty close, actually.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
I can be there in my mind.
excellent.
Yeah.
So as for what we do, so Liz is a gastroenterologist. So we own a medical practice in Phoenix. So we treat people with digestive issues. We also have a wellness adjunct to the practice. So I went back to school to get my degree in holistic nutrition. So I deliver the wellness part of what we do, and I run the practice. And Liz scopes butts all day.
Wow. Brings a whole new meaning to they let anyone in, doesn't it? Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your relationship together and even separately, and what it's been like to be Christians in a church that hasn't always been gracious to gay and lesbian people. And my own story is probably the story of many people here. Where I grew up, we had a certain way of understanding the whole issue of homosexuality, and the Bible says it's wrong, so it must be wrong. But as I got older and began to really, first of all, study the Bible and see what it really says, began to meet people like you who are Christian people, and I've been told you can't possibly be, and yet here you are. And then just to look at our own prejudices and fears, look at brain science, I found out, you know what, you're just real people like everybody else, right? And yet the church hasn't always treated you that way. So I want to hear a little bit of what it was like to grow up gay in a church that you believed in, but that wasn't always so loving to you. So tell us a couple stories in your experience.
Okay, so I grew up Catholic, and I didn't go through my transition, like my realization, until I was older. So I was actually living in San Francisco at the time. I'd gone there to start a business with a buddy of mine, and that's where I met Liz. She was doing her GI fellowship at UCSF. And I had joined the Catholic Church as soon as I had gotten to San Francisco, and I was always involved in church. So I started helping to teach the RCIA program, which is the program that helps Catholics, people who want to become Catholic, become Catholic. And so I'd gone through that a couple times with people, and then one year Liz walked in, and that's where I met her. And I was going through that whole transition during that time, so it was very confusing for me and very hard. A few years later, when we actually got together, we came back here to Phoenix, and we went back to the church that I grew up in, which was actually very accepting of us because, again, I grew up in this church, so all these people were like my aunts and uncles and my grandparents, and the pastor there at the time was a known gay man. And so we did everything there. We served, we lectured, we were Eucharistic ministers, we did religious education for kids. And about 15 years ago, a new bishop came to town, and he was very anti-gay. And he basically spent his first year in getting rid of all the known gay pastors in the valley, ours being one of them. And he replaced him with a lovely man from Uganda, but it was hard because he didn't really know the ways of America, much less know about gay. And so we would go to church every week, sit in the front row with our 8-year-old at the time, and I told Liz, I'm like, I don't think he knows we're together. We got pregnant with our second child, Kai, and I told her, we're going to need to go sit with him and let him know that we're going to want to baptize this baby when he's born. So we had a meeting with him, and when we told him, he just sat there like, he just turned white. Felt like forever. He said to us, well, do you not like men? We said, no, we love men. We just prefer to be with each other. And he didn't know what to do.
Sure.
And so he went to the bishop. Well, we know what the bishop felt about gay. And so when the next time he spoke with us, he basically told us that they had to baptize the baby, but it had to be in private, and this wasn't your church clapping for you. That's what was said, which was really hard to hear. I really felt like it wasn't God turning his back on us, but our church.
Okay.
And they also stripped us of all of our serving. So we weren't allowed to serve anymore, which was very hard. My parents ended up leaving that church over that incident. We left that church over that incident.
So you almost feel like a pariah, right?
Yeah.
Right? Now, Liz, we're going to hear a little of your story, but would you introduce your kids to us and your family and talk about and brag about all of them a little bit? And I know
Sure.
one of them's not here today.
Yes, we have our oldest one, who is actually my medical school souvenir. He's 23 years old. He is a naval officer stationed in San Diego. And then we have our 3 kids here.
They're half asleep now. They've been here all weekend. Wake up, Kai. You got this one last time. You just got to stand. Yep.
Kainoa, he's 14 years old, and then our twins, Casey and Taylor. They're 10, going on 11 this month.
And they're just delightful kids. Thank you. I had a chance to go with Kai through the Rite of Passage program just a couple years ago, and you should be proud parents. They're just wonderful kids. So you grew up in the church as well, a different denomination. Yeah.
Yes, so I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is a Protestant church. I'm like a 3rd generation, and very, very conservative, and also being gay was a very taboo thing, and my story is different from Tina's. I knew from the time I was little. So I think the brain studies, the genetic studies, whatever that shows, I knew from the time I was little. But I also knew that this was not going to go in my Seventh-day Adventist church and in the community, in society.
Right.
And so I did the traditional thing, and I married a man who I met in medical school, and we had our son, our 23-year-old gift from God, but unfortunately that marriage did not work. So, anyways, then I met Tina, and then what happened with us in San Francisco, I became Catholic. And the reason I did that, after being in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, in Guam, I was stationed in Guam in the Navy. I was at the Naval Hospital, and my ex-husband and I divorced there on Guam. And instead of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which we had been going to faithfully supporting us, kind of turned their backs on us, and it was my Catholic friends who supported me. So that was really the reason why I gravitated over to that and met Tina. And then we come out here, and then that happens with the Catholic Church. And so then we kept searching. We didn't stop, because we knew that was one of the many things Tina and I had in common, was we loved God, and we wanted to serve him, and we wanted our children to grow up with that also. So we found a church right around the time the twins were born, and we were at that church for several years, and until a few years ago. But it was really difficult to serve in that church. The people were loving and friendly, but there was a little bit of a standoffish. And every time we would want to volunteer to be involved in different things, many times we got turned down, and sometimes we would just show up to places where we knew they couldn't turn us away, like to go feed the hungry downtown, show up at 5 in the morning. You can't send me away. So we would do stuff like that. But the final thing was when Tina and I joined a couples Bible study, and then a week later, Tina got a call from one of the elders saying, you know what, we've gotten together and we want to know if you guys will back out of this, because the other couples are not going to be comfortable. So we did. We backed down graciously, and at that point is when we went back out on our search and started hunting. And then Alan Gardner is the one that told us about this church. Our kids were in theater together, and he said, you guys got to come to this church. You're not the only gay couple we've got others in the church. You need to come. And somehow we ended up here at a recital, because our kids were taking lessons with Lisa, and so we ended up here at a recital. And the minute we walked in, we just felt the love. We felt that energy, and it was so welcoming, and we could feel like you guys live what you preach with a reckless grace and the love. And we were asked to serve communion, and I would ask Tina, do they know we're gay? They're letting us serve. I was like, we can't go to the members class because they can't find out. They won't let us be members.
We caught on.
Caught on.
And I don't even have a good gaydar, whatever they call them,
like,
but we
caught
on.
We didn't even ask to serve here, because we were too afraid to ask to serve.
Well, understandably so, because you were constantly turned down. What amazes me from your story is your persistence to keep coming back again and again to the Christian church that constantly pushed you away. And your persistence says a lot about your faith and your passion to really raise your family to know Jesus. And I just want to say to you, the fact that they're here and the fact that they can stand up here today and talk about their faith and to be loved and accepted says a lot about you. And for me personally, I said this a little bit ago, I had to go through my own process of trying to understand what is Scripture saying, what is science saying, what is God saying in all of this. And that's what it means to be an open church, to say that we're going to love each other and we're going to learn from each other. You've made us a better church because you're here.
Well, thank you.
And we're delighted to have you. Let's thank them for sharing with us today. Thank you both. Thank you. Good work today. Wow, thank you. The Bible says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him might not perish but have everlasting life. We all know that verse. The next one's important as well. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. God has never been in the business of condemning people. God has always been in the business of gracing people. And our DNA here is to live into our name, Community of Grace, to be a place for anyone and everyone. We're not going to do that perfectly. But that's our call, to step into that moment of reckless grace each and every week and to say, God, we want to share your grace with as many people as possible to let the world know that you love them. And so we're going to have a chance to experience that reckless grace together through communion, a meal that God shares with all of us. And as we get ready for it, let's stand together and pray the prayer of confession.